Hey, how's it going? Seth here. In this video, I'm going to show you the process I go through when I'm evaluating a piece of land before I make an offer. So in order to make a final offer on a piece of land, you have to be pretty confident about what you're going to get and what this property consists of, how big it is, the different attributes, what it can and can't do for you or the next person you sell it to. In order to find that information, we got to do a little bit of research. And the tool I'm going to be using for this is the land portal. So we can find just about everything we need to know right here. And we're also going to be showing you how I keep track of this information. There's actually a couple of different ways it can be done. One of the ways is this due diligence spreadsheet. I'll just show you what I go through. There's nothing magic about this. It just helps me keep track of everything for one property in one place. But then also, if you're using Stride CRM, you can know the exact same stuff here. And the benefit of putting it in Stride is that it will integrate with your entire system. So you don't have to have a bunch of spreadsheets all over the place. It's all just baked right in here, and you can move each property and property owner along with all the notes, all the conversations you've ever had with them, all that stuff in one spot. It's pretty nice. If you're doing more than like a deal or two a month, this can be extremely useful just because you'll have a whole lot less clutter and you can stay more organized. So I'll start by showing you how to do it in this spreadsheet, but just understand everything I'm showing you here can also be done in here. And I'll kind of switch back and forth to kind of help you understand that as we go through it. So the property I've got in mind here is this parcel number I'll throw here in the land portal. By the way, when you do have a property, whether somebody has responded to your mail or a text or a call or whatever it is that you sent out, you can either search for it by the address, but a lot of times the vacant land, there is no physical address yet. So you could also search for it by the parcel number or the owner name or the coordinates if you have those. In this case, I've got a parcel number, and I know this one is in Florida in Columbia County. I'll just throw this in there. Found it right here. Go ahead and click on this. It'll take us all the way to it. And right over here on the left, you're going to see a lot of relevant, helpful information about the property. And then right over here on the right, we're going to see a parcel map of the property. And just to hide the identities of all these other property owners, I'm going to turn off owner names so we can just see the parcel numbers for now. Kind of zoom out, and that little red rectangle there is the property we're looking at. And right off the bat, we can see a lot of the property details that we need to know. And this is the information we're going to start taking and plugging into our spreadsheet here. We're just going to call this guy John Doe just to protect his privacy. And presumably, if you've already generated and exported your list from whatever your data service is, in my case, it would be the land portal. That's like one of the main uses of this software. You would already have some of this information, maybe all of it. For example, the owner's street address, their city, state, zip. I'll just fill this in with some basic info. Now we get down to the actual property details. So it's asking for a property street address. As I just mentioned, a lot of times vacant lots do not have a physical registered street address yet. So in that case, if this one doesn't have that, I would just leave it blank. So right here, we can see the owner's mailing address, but that's not the same as the property address. And up here where it says parcel address, we can see there's nothing there for the address or the city. So we're going to leave those blank for now. For the property county, put that in here. For the property zip code, we can see that right here under parcel address. It says parcel address zip code. So we'll copy that, put it right in here. And then for the property parcel number, that's right here where it says parcel ID. So we'll copy this, put it right in here. And then for the legal description, that is right down here where it says legal description under parcel address. Copy that, put that right here. Now, if you have a system like Stride, we would go over here to the opportunities button in the left sidebar, and we would go ahead and click on add opportunity. And by doing this, we're basically creating a new spreadsheet in our system. So we'd put all the same information in here. Depending on how you handle your CRM, what some people will do is when they export their whole list from the land portal, they will import the entire thing right in here. So this John Doe person, his name would already be in the system. I could click on this and just type out John Doe, and it would find his information and populate all the stuff automatically, saving me a lot of time that I just spent doing that. However, if this person just sort of contacted me randomly off my website or something like that, and I don't have any of their information in, I would go ahead and just create a new contact right here as I create this new opportunity. I would just type out John Doe and then create new contact, put his phone number in here, put his email in here, and I'm going to leave the rest of this blank for now just because we haven't gotten to those steps yet, but I would just go ahead and click create. And now we've got a new property record right here. But to get even deeper into the details about this property and property owner, we could click on this where it says view conversations. And this is going to open up this contact that we created, all the information we've entered so far. But as you scroll down over here, we can see a whole lot more information about that person's address, and then a lot of the other details we're about to go through are here as well, and then some. So there's a ton of information you can enter in about a property if you're using something like Stride that just helps you keep better track of things and even helps you calculate certain KPIs and metrics and understand, like, what is this property even worth to us in the end if we buy it for the price we want and can sell it? Like, how much money is on the line with this opportunity, which can really just help you understand the importance you should be placing on this property, how hard you should be working to negotiate, because you can actually see how much money is right there on the line. So just be aware, Stride is a super helpful tool that will do a much better job of helping you keep track of the stuff without having to create hundreds of spreadsheets like what I'm showing you over here. But if you're just getting started and you don't want to dive into CRM yet, I'm going to show you just a more bare bones version of it here, which hopefully you'll be able to grasp. So the next thing we want to understand is, what is the size of this property? Well, that's pretty easy to find. We just go right back over here. We can see this property is 5.01 acres. So go ahead and put that here. Now, what kind of road access is there? Just looking at this right here, it looks like that's a nice paved road with a cul-de-sac. And actually, another thing worth noting is that it's not just about your ability to see the road from the satellite pictures, but you can actually see in the land portal, it'll show you the exact amount of road frontage that there is. In this case, it's 414.79 feet. The main point is just you want to make sure it's not landlocked, and it will verify that for you right here by saying, no, it's not landlocked. But the amount of road frontage can actually be important too. Say if you're buying a giant parcel and you want to subdivide the thing, it can be a huge savings if you can just use the existing road as part of that subdivide without having to build and add new roads to it. So this can kind of just give you an idea for how much road frontage there currently is. And then what about utilities? Water, electricity, gas, or phone? So that's information we could usually get just by having a conversation with the seller. So whatever they tell me, I would put that information here. We could also call local utility companies just to understand, like, hey, do you serve this area or this address or this subdivision, and get it that way too. In terms of water accessibility, this is an issue that's going to be a bigger concern in some areas versus others. In a place like Florida, it's not hard to get access to water. Like, you can pretty much always drill a well or get access to it one way or another. If you're working in a place like New Mexico or Arizona or parts of Texas, there might not be any water. If you can't get water at all, that can be a very material, serious issue that can really mess with a property's market value. So the bottom line is, we just want to kind of understand what's available here. And usually when you see a platted subdivision like this, you're probably not going to do this unless a lot of these questions have been answered, because either the municipality would require that they can prove that this stuff is available, or they would install it in the process of doing this. Like, they clearly put a road in here. They probably wouldn't spend the huge money it takes to do that without making sure these other boxes are checked. So that usually gives me some comfort when I see this. But say if I was buying a property, something like one of these larger parcels where it's more like truly raw land and nobody's done anything to it, that's when I would want to work a little bit harder to get those questions answered. Let's say yes to all, and then zoning classification. We can figure out the zoning right here. If we click back on this again, and the zoning code is A3, and I'm assuming that A probably means agricultural, although we may want to look that up and verify. And agricultural is usually not a problem at all. Annual property taxes, so we can find that right down here. Looks like it's 669.71. Now, the approximate percentage of flood zone and wetlands. So these are two separate things that are kind of similar, where we just want to understand, is this a property that is in or anywhere near a flood zone? And if so, what kind of flood zone? And the reason this matters is because properties in flood zones are probably going to be more expensive for that future owner to own, just because they have to pay flood insurance now, not to mention the fact that their property could flood, and that's not very desirable. So that's a very material fact you would want to know about. In wetlands, you literally can't build in wetlands, or I shouldn't say you can't. You can, but it's very, very expensive to do that, because in order to take out any wetland area, you have to buy wetland credits, which basically means you're creating new wetlands in another area. In fact, even more wetlands than the ones you're taking out. So both of those things, super important to know if they exist on your property. And luckily, the land portal makes that super easy to figure out. You just click on this map filters and view, and you can click on wetlands. And if there are wetlands on the property, you'll see them there. but we just turned that on and I don't see any. Looks like we're probably in the clear. The wetlands filter here on the land portal is taking this information from the government database, and that government database is not always pinpoint accurate. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that this is perfect, but it's usually a good starting point, and it'll point out any giant glaring issues if they are there. And then FEMA floodplain. So it looks like there is a little flood zone up here. Luckily, that's not our property, so we don't have to worry about that. Go ahead and say no to both of those here. Thank goodness. All right, now next up is the perk test. Now the perk test is not something you can really understand just by looking at the land portal. I have a whole separate video explaining what the perk test is and why it's necessary and why it's important to the property's value. But the way to get the answer to this question is to simply ask the seller if they've ever had a perk test, and if so, what the results were. If you don't know the answer, just say unknown and move on, and just keep in mind you may want to investigate that before you purchase, depending on how much you're putting into this and what your future potential uses of the property are. If the highest and best use of this property is to build any kind of a dwelling where a septic system would be required, then you're probably going to want to get the answer to that before you close. Moving on here, parcel map available. So this answer is almost always going to be yes if you have the land portal, because they've got parcel maps pretty much everywhere. But if for some reason you're working in some county that's just way out in the middle of nowhere, and if for some oddball reason you don't have that parcel map, you'd probably want to make note of that here, just because with vacant land, it's very important to understand where the thing actually is and where the boundaries are. This is usually pretty easy to figure out for a house, but for land, sometimes it's not clear at all if you don't have that parcel map. And in that case, you might want to get some kind of boundary survey just to be super clear on where that is. And now moving on, are there any buildings or junk on the property? So sometimes you'll look up properties like this that are supposedly vacant land, and from the satellite map, you'll see there's actually like a shed on there, or a house, or a mobile home, or a parked car, or somebody just threw junk all over the property. That's definitely something to know about, simply because that stuff you see on the property will most likely affect the value and desirability of the property, for better or worse. For example, if it's junk, you would want to get that junk removed before you try to resell it. If it's a house, then that could make the property value go up or down depending on the condition of that house. And also keep in mind, sometimes these satellite maps that you're looking at will be a year or 2 or 3 old for whatever reason. If you click on this map filters and view, there's actually like a secondary version of the satellite map where you can see a different view of it. Sometimes you'll see different stuff when you switch between these things. You can also try Google Street View if Street View is available. But ultimately, the only way to know this for sure would be to send somebody out to the property like right now, whether it's a local realtor or hiring a drone pilot to get out there and take some drone footage of it. But bottom line is, if there's any junk or anything on the property that you weren't expecting, you would want to know that and put that here. And then how do the adjoining or neighboring properties look? So you really just look at this and look at the adjoining and neighboring properties. Does anything about them look odd? Does anything stand out for better or worse? Sometimes you might even want to zoom out and see, hey, do you see evidence of any like pig farms or landfills or anything that would cause undesirable sights or sounds or smells or anything like that? Just worth knowing, because sometimes that can get in the way and be a problem. Sometimes you could even have like a neighbor next door who causes problems for you. So not saying any of that would happen, but again, just good to investigate and be aware of that. And then lastly, we have the topography and slope report. So thanks to the land portal, we can actually figure this out really easily now. First of all, we can click this 3D button and just kind of see the same kind of thing we could normally see in Google Earth, where we can move it around a little bit and just see if anything stands out about this in terms of, ooh, that's a really steep slope. We can also click on this and turn on the contour lines. And once we do that, we're going to start seeing these lines that show us where the elevations start to change throughout this property. And this alone is pretty helpful, but if you're not well versed at looking at these kinds of topographical lines and understanding what that even means, something even more helpful that will really clear this up is to order a slope report, which, by the way, you can do for free if you're a subscriber to the advanced plan with the land portal, which is not expensive at all. All I have to do is open this thing back up. And first of all, we can go down here where it says slope analysis and see the slope average and how much of the property has a flat slope of 0 to 0.5%, how much of it has a minimal slope, moderate slope. And I know this might look like a lot of just confusing numbers and percentages if you're not familiar with this. By the way, I've got another video that explains all these slope percentages a lot better in terms of understanding when is it a problem and when is it fine. But just to make this really clear, we can click on this AI report thing and click slope report. And we're going to send this request. And within about a minute, we'll be able to see a very detailed report that shows exactly what kind of slopes we have on this property. Just right off the bat, the fact that the slope average throughout the entire property is 3.15% and that 87.26% of the property is 0.5 to 5% slope, that's a really good sign. That's basically exactly what we want to see for building. What we wouldn't necessarily want to see is if a bunch of the property is like heavy slope or more. Once it gets over like 10 to 15% slope, that's when the engineering costs would get really expensive to build on a property. So flat or minimal slope is generally what you want to see. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So I'll go over here and minimal slope, just to show you what I'm talking about here. When we go over here and click on slope reports. So right up here, we can see the slope report that we just ordered. We're just going to click download PDF. And when we open it up, you can see just about every piece of information you'd ever want to see regarding the slope of the property. If we scroll down here, we can see these heat maps that really just point out any potential issues where there's big topographical variations on the property. This particular one is not a huge problem at all because it's fairly flat to begin with. But if we did have one that was on a cliff or had a ravine or had a lot of hills on it, we'd see all that information here. So next up, this information down here, it's not vital, but it's just kind of helpful to have if it's available. So something you can see in the land portal is a lot of the title and sale and loan information. For example, if we go down here and we see the sale info, we can see that the last sale price of this property was $75,000. So somebody actually paid that for this property, and this was back in 2007. So quite a while ago now. And the reason this is helpful is just to know as a reference point, hey, at one point in time, somebody was willing to pay that much for this piece of property. And it was actually kind of a long time ago now. So if anything, it's worth at least that amount, most likely. We could say 10, 15, 2007, 75,000. And then where it says first loan amount or balance of any mortgages. So with a lot of vacant land properties, you're usually going to see that there is no loan balance because banks don't love to finance vacant land unless the owner has an immediate plan to build on that land, or if that borrower is just really financially well off, then they could get a loan too. But most of the time, when you see people buying land and they just keep it as vacant land, there's a good chance they own that land free and clear. That's just how it usually works out. So usually what you're going to see is just no mortgage balance here at all. But if they do have a mortgage balance, that's really important to know about because they're going to have to pay that loan off if and when you buy this property from them, which basically means your offer is going to have to be at least the amount of their mortgage balance because they have an obligation to pay that thing off. So again, if they had a loan there, you could put what the original loan amount was right here in the first loan amount and then what the current balance of that most likely is. And in order to find out that current balance, we would just have to ask them because the land portal probably is not going to tell us that. It would only tell us what that original loan amount would be. But luckily, there's nothing to talk about here. And at this point, we don't know if they have any delinquent taxes. We would have to contact the county to verify that. And delinquent taxes are kind of like a teeny tiny mortgage balance in that in order for you to buy that property, someone has to pay off those taxes, whether it's you or that seller. So if there are delinquent taxes, you want to find that out and put that here. And then are there any other people on title? So the reason that's important is because your original conversation with the person who calls about this property might be with John Doe. But if this property is in a state with dowry laws that require that person's spouse to also sign off, even if they're not on title, they essentially have to be part of the conversation too, or at least willing to sign off. So you would just want to know, hey, are you married? If so, are they willing to sell this thing? And or is somebody else on title? Like, is it John Doe and his brother? Because you can't take full title to this property unless both of them are willing to sign off. So again, if there's somebody else, you would just want to know that. In this case, I'm just going to assume the answer is no and move on. And then down here, listing information. So most of the time when I'm contacting a motivated seller and they respond to my direct mail campaign, in the vast majority of cases, it's not listed. Like they don't even care about their property. They probably totally forgot about it and they just want a cash offer so they can move on. But if that property does happen to be listed with a realtor, that's important to know, first of all, because it shows you that that seller clearly has some value in mind for what this thing is worth. And they may be slightly less motivated simply because they're clearly not apathetic about it because they're trying to get it sold. But even if they are totally motivated and willing to accept whatever offer you make to them, it's still important to know about that realtor because that realtor is going to have to get paid a commission. You're probably going to have to work with them in some capacity to get the deal closed. So if the property is listed with a realtor, you'll just want to ask the seller that, or maybe even look the property up on Zillow to see, hey, is it listed there? And whatever that information is, you would put it here. And then moving on up here to the valuation. So this is where things can get kind of interesting because vacant land is just a really tricky type of property to value. Even professional licensed appraisers don't really know how to do it that effectively because a lot of the data that you need to determine a property's property's value, it's not easy to get for vacant land. Usually the only data that you have to go by are the sales of similar comparable properties in the area in the not too distant past, like within the past 6 to 12 months. And sometimes you'll be able to find it and sometimes you won't. And when you can't find it, you'll have to either go a little bit further back in time or maybe look at properties that are listed for sale and apply some kind of discount to them. It can be kind of a tricky thing. And at the end of the day, whatever value you come up with, it's still somewhat subjective because we could find somebody who's willing to pay $80,000 for this property, but we could also find a random person who is willing to pay $150,000 for this property. For example, to the average person, this property may be worth, I don't know, 100 grand, but maybe to this neighbor who owns this property, to them, it's worth more than anyone else in the world because their property's right next to it. So maybe they'd be willing to pay 200 grand. So what I'm getting at is it's really hard to know an objective absolute value for land, but there are a few things we can start looking at. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, we can always start with the last sale price of the property if it's there, if this is in a disclosure state when we can actually see that. We can also see the assessed value. And the assessed value, it's not really that critical of a number to know, but it's worth at least glancing at because in some states, what this value means is that is 50% of what the county thinks this property is worth. In other states, it may be 100% of what the local assessor thinks the property is worth. In other states, it might be some other weird fraction of what they think it's worth. So first of all, you'd want to make sure you understand what this even means in the state where you're working. And I'm not even sure, to be honest, how Florida works. But if, for example, we assume this means 50% of the property's value, then that means, well, I guess the local assessor must think it's actually worth about $99,000 or $100,000 if that's 50% of it. And the reason I say this is not that critical of a number is because the local assessor that comes up with these numbers is not an appraiser. Whatever number they come up with here, they're usually basing it on the most recent sales prices of similar properties in the area. If anything, I've found this number usually to be lagging a couple years behind reality. So if market values have suddenly shot way up or if prices suddenly dropped dramatically, this is usually just reflecting what sales prices looked like a year or two ago. And even back then, the assessor still wasn't a professional appraiser. So that's why I say it's not terribly important. But what they do have access to is all the sales prices. So there is some educated guess going on here. So we can go up here and put that number up here and then move it on here to where it says ballpark market value. So this is where there's lots of different subjective ways you could go about doing it. And there's a lot I can say about this. I've got other videos that are over 20 minutes long explaining that whole process. But luckily, the land portal kind of has you covered here too. So we can go ahead to this AI report button again. And this time we're going to click comp report and we're going to send a request. And within a matter of seconds, what it's going to do is it's going to use its little AI brain to go out and find similar comps that it thinks are most relevant to this property. When we go over here to comp reports, it's going to show us what it came up with. If we go ahead and scroll down, it will tell us this total TLP, that's the land portal, estimate price of $75,163. And the way it came up with that was by finding all of these similar comparable properties. And you might think this is just like a perfect average of these, but it's actually not. It's a weighted average based on the comps that the land portal's AI bot thinks is the most relevant. And the most relevant ones are these ones up here at the top. And it'll show us all the different stats about these properties. And if we want to, we can even click on these links and it'll open up a new window and bring us to these comps so we can see what these comps are like and understand why the land portal picked them. And as we take a closer look, we can decide for ourselves, like, is this a relevant comp or not? For example, on this one, I'm seeing a little shed there. So maybe it's not. I mean, maybe that might be enough reason for me to remove this from one of the comps if I want to. We could click on this next one and see what this one looks like, see if this one is similar enough to our subject property. And as we zoom closer, that does look pretty similar. So I think that's a pretty solid one. And if we want to save this one as a valid comp that we want to keep using, all we'd have to do is copy the link up here at the top and then paste it right in here. And all we would have to do is click this, and whether we have a land portal account that we're logged into or not, it'll take us right back there to that same property. So we can kind of see the details on this one and what the last sale price was for this. Looks like this one sold for 70 grand not long ago. So based on that, I'm pretty comfortable with that value if we assume that's what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that in here for now. Now, if we've got any other comments or things we want to mention about this property, just for future reference, we could do that here. By the way, if you're using Stride, all you'd have to do is go to the contacts, find the contact that owns this property where you can see all the notes here, and you can always add additional notes right up here as well. Now, moving on here. So we've got this estimated market value at $75,000 and the property taxes, HOA fees, and assessments owed. So this is where you would just want to verify what any existing mortgage balances are, any delinquent taxes, anything like that. If we saw that the annual property taxes were $669.71, we could always just put that in there just for kicks. And then for purchase and closing costs, so the number that goes here kind of depends on how you're going to close on this deal. If you're going to close it by yourself, just by, creating a deed and getting it signed, that's pretty darn cheap to do. I mean, I can usually get that job done for $200 or $300 all in, maybe even less. You could put, maybe $250 in there. If I was going to close with a title company, I might put like $750 in there. If I was going to close with a attorney, which is required in some states, I might want to put $1,000 or, $1,500 even in there. So it kind of just depends on how you're planning to close. I'm going to use a title company in this case. Now, where it says the agent commission on the sale of this property. So, once we buy it, and then if we use a real estate agent, and not just any real estate agent, but a land specialized real estate agent to sell this thing. In some cases, depending on where you are in the country, I've found usually east of the Mississippi, for whatever reason, they require a 10% commission, whereas west of the Mississippi, again, I'm not sure why, but a lot of them tend to only require a 6% commission. And in some cases, it might even be less, depending on the agent and if they're willing to cut you a deal. So this calculator is going to assume that 10% commission amount, which you can see right up there in the formula. But if you wanted to change this, you could. And if you're planning to sell it by yourself without an agent at all, then you could just put 0 in here because you're not going to have to pay any commissions. And there's also the closing cost to think about on the selling side. So in most normal sales, the closing costs are kind of broken up between the buyer and seller, whereas usually when I'm purchasing, I'm assuming that I'm going to have to pay 100% of the closing costs. So you could put whatever amount seems appropriate here. You could put $500 if the future buyer is going to pay part of them. You could put $750 in there if you're using a title company just to be conservative. It's up to you, but the point is you want to just figure out what these costs are most likely going to be, not only to buy it, but also when you sell it. And the reason you want to know all this is because at the end of the day, and at the end of this calculation, it's going to tell you what the actual redeemable value is of this thing. So after you pay all of your current and future costs, the actual cash that you get to take home, assuming you can actually sell it at this price, is going to be about that amount. So that's your net proceeds before you factor in however much you are having to pay to purchase this property. And how much should you pay to purchase this property? Well, that's a great question. And there's a lot to consider on that end as well. And beneath this, you'll see 5 different calculations for what you could pay. And way back in the day when I was first getting started in this, when there was no competition, when the market was super slow, I could routinely make offers for about 10% and occasionally get those things accepted. These days, 10% offers are pretty hard to come by unless the property is just a mess and has a ton of problems. I don't want to say impossible, but it's not the norm. Usually the offers I'm making are more in this 40 to 50% range. But again, it just depends on a variety of factors, like if I'm planning to do anything to make the property more valuable or not, or how motivated the seller is, or how much I want the property. There's a lot of things that can go into this. And I'm not telling you that you should use any of those numbers. It's really just to give you a range of ideas of what you could offer if you were going to do one of these percentages. I've actually got more of an offer range depending on what the property is actually worth. And again, this isn't the only thing to consider, but it's one thing to consider. If you've got a property that's worth a lot of money, it's not even so much about the percentages. It's more about how many dollars you're going to walk away with. If you've got a property that's worth $1 million, and if you can buy that thing for $500,000, and if you can get anywhere near doubling your money on that, that's huge. And percentages and ROIs don't matter nearly as much when you're talking about the actual take-home pay of that thing. Whereas if you're doubling your money on something that you paid a couple $1,000 for, that's not nearly as exciting. So for those super cheap properties, I'd be offering a much lower percentage. So just another thing to keep in mind. And then beneath that, it's going to tell you your maximum, medium, or low net profit based on which one of these offers you make, you would end up walking away with. And if you're just concerned about the ROI, which sometimes matters a lot, sometimes it doesn't matter that much, as I just explained, you can see the actual ROI numbers of each one of these scenarios as well. So that's the basic due diligence process I go through before I move forward with closing out a property. Sometimes I'll do a little bit more depending on how much I'm putting into it and how much money is going down. If I'm buying a property for like $100,000, then I'm probably going to actually spend some money to do a perk test and figure these things out. And make sure that there are no lingering issues just to eliminate any doubt. But if it's a super cheap property, then sometimes you can kind of skip over this stuff. That's not nearly as important because there's just not as much money on the line. And if you want an even more organized version of this that will integrate with your entire CRM and the rest of the acquisition and even selling process, be sure to check out Stride. You can find more about that at stridecrm.co. And also, if you want to check out the land portal, I strongly recommend the advanced plan. And if you sign up through the REtipster affiliate link, you can actually get 1,000 free exports if you sign up for the advanced plan and use coupon code Seth at checkout. And by the way, if you want to make a copy of this Google Sheet for yourself and use it for your own future reference, I'll have a link beneath this video where you can sign up for our email list and then download this for free if you're on REtipster.com, or if you're watching this in the Land Investing Masterclass, you can just click beneath this video and make a copy right there. No need to sign up for anything. So thanks again for watching. I'll talk to you next time.